10 years had passed, but the pain on the faces of Mr. and Mrs. Navarro had not faded. They sat side by side on a worn couch in their modest home in Wollongong, Australia. But their eyes told the story of parents who had been frozen in time. Their 3 sons, Miguel, Diego, and Luis, had vanished without a trace. 10 years ago, they left home with promises of better days. The brothers had found an opportunity overseas, in Moldova, where a construction company had offered high-paying jobs to young, skilled laborers. It was supposed to be the break their struggling family needed. Miguel, the eldest at 28, was the leader, always protective. Diego, 25, had a quick laugh and an easy charm. Luis, the youngest at 22, still had the shy smile of a boy trying to step into manhood. Their mother remembered that morning in painful detail, how they hugged her tightly, their arms strong but their hearts beating fast. Mr. Navarro had tried to stay stoic, clapping each son on the back and telling them to make him proud. But Mrs. Navarro, she had felt something different, a cold weight pressing against her chest as she watched them load their backpacks into the taxi. "I felt it that day," she whispered, voice shaking, "as if I was losing them forever." At Sydney Airport, the brothers had been captured on grainy CCTV footage, 3 young men, full of hope, waving at the camera as they passed through security. Their smiles were bright, backpacks slung over their shoulders, oblivious to the dark twist their journey would take. That footage would become the last proof that they had ever existed beyond Australian soil. They boarded a flight to Moldova that evening. A promising job, a new chapter. Miguel, Diego, and Luis Navarro were not the kind of young men you'd expect to vanish without a trace. In their tight-knit Wollongong community, they were known as hard-working and respectful, the kind of sons every parent quietly admired. Miguel, the eldest at 28, had always been the responsible one, helping his father with odd jobs and watching over his younger brothers. Diego, 26, had a lighter spirit, often making people laugh at family barbecues, but he worked just as hard as Miguel. And Luis, only 23, was still finding his way, the shy dreamer with big plans but little experience. Their decision to take jobs overseas came as both a shock and a blessing. A recruiter had offered them lucrative construction contracts in Chisinau, Moldova, a chance to earn far more than they ever could back home. The pay promised to lift their struggling family out of financial hardship. Their parents were hesitant at first, but the boys were persuasive. Friends and neighbors gathered at the Navarro home the night before their departure, offering warm hugs and tearful goodbyes. Photos were taken, laughter was shared, and promises were made. "We'll call you every week, Mom. Don't worry." For the first 2 weeks, everything seemed fine. The brothers kept their word, calling home regularly through grainy video chats. They spoke of long days at the construction site, cold nights in a shared apartment, but they reassured their parents that things were going well. Miguel's voice was steady, Diego's jokes lightened every call, and Luis, though quieter, smiled when his mother asked if he was eating enough. And then, without warning, the calls stopped. First, it was missed appointments. Then the boys' phones started going straight to voicemail. Their once active social media accounts fell silent. Messages sent by friends and family went unread. Days turned into weeks, and an icy panic gripped the Navarro household. Mr. and Mrs. Navarro called the embassy, filed reports, begged for answers, but no one could explain why the brothers had suddenly gone dark. The Australian government offered little comfort. They said the boys were adults, free to make their own choices. Maybe they wanted a fresh start. Maybe they'd fallen out of touch. Maybe they chose to disappear. Young men sometimes do that. But Mrs. Navarro knew better. A mother knows. The suggestion hit Mrs. Navarro like a slap. My sons would never do that. They would never abandon us. But no one seemed interested in looking deeper. The government's stance was clear. Unless there was evidence of foul play, there would be no official inquiry. They clung to each other as time wore on, the world moving forward while their own had collapsed. Birthdays passed without candles. Holidays came and went in silence. The family home, once filled with laughter and music, became a shrine of photographs and fading memories. Weeks turned into months. The Navarro family plastered photos of their sons everywhere, reaching out to Moldovan authorities, embassies, even private investigators, but every lead dried up as quickly as it appeared. It was as though the brothers had vanished into thin air. And then, 6 months after their disappearance, the letters started arriving. At first, they were simple, and signed notes slipped into their mailbox. The first read, "Stop looking. They're gone." Mrs. Navarro's hands trembled as she read it aloud. There was no address, no signature, no clue as to who had sent it. The police dismissed it as a cruel prank, but more letters followed, each more cryptic and threatening. "You're wasting your time. Forget them. They won't be found." Fear wrapped its cold fingers around the family. Mr. Navarro began sleeping with the porch light on, convinced they were being watched. Mrs. Navarro grew thin, unable to eat, haunted by every shadow. But the real turning point came when a reporter from Sydney, a man named Peter Vance, knocked on their door. He had seen their story in the local paper and claimed he'd been investigating similar disappearances linked to overseas job scams. His words made the blood drain from Mrs. Navarro's face. "Your boys didn't just vanish," he said softly. "They were taken." Peter hinted at something far more sinister. Whispers of a trafficking ring operating through Eastern Europe, targeting young Australian men with promises of high-paying jobs. He couldn't prove it yet, but the pattern was disturbingly familiar. Young workers go abroad, maintain contact for a short while, then disappear without a trace. Their cases are quietly closed as voluntary disappearances, and no serious investigation follows. The Navarros clung to Peter's every word, torn between hope and horror. If what he said was true, their sons might still be alive, but trapped in a nightmare far worse than death. Mrs. Navarro, her voice shaking, asked the question no parent should ever have to. Are they being held somewhere? Are they suffering? Peter didn't answer directly, but his silence was answer enough. As this dark possibility settled over them, a new determination lit in Mr. Navarro's eyes. For the first time in months, grief gave way to resolve. We're going to find them, whatever it takes. But the reporter's final warning left them chilled once again. If you keep digging, be careful. People who ask too many questions about this, they tend to disappear too. The Navarro family's nightmare was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. For years, the Navarros lived in a torturous limbo. Every time the phone rang, their hearts leapt. Every knock at the door sent them running. But it was never their boys. Just neighbors, reporters, or officials with empty words. Rachel Hooper wasn't just any reporter. She'd built her career on chasing uncomfortable truths, the kind that others were too afraid to touch. When she first heard about the Navarro brothers' case through Peter Vance's notes, something about it gnawed at her. The pattern, the silence, the eerie letters. She decided to dig deeper, knowing well the risks. Her first step was to track down the job recruitment company that supposedly sent Miguel, Diego, and Luis to Moldova. On paper, it seemed legitimate. A glossy website, glowing testimonials, and promises of generous salaries for skilled labor abroad. But when Rachel tried to find a business registration, there was nothing. No tax records, no office, no real employees. It was a phantom, a carefully constructed front designed to lure in desperate young men with dreams of lifting their families out of poverty. Rachel's investigation took her down a rabbit hole. She found similar stories scattered across Australia. Families who had lost sons and brothers under nearly identical circumstances. Young men recruited by the same company, flown to Eastern Europe, kept in contact for a few weeks, then nothing but silence. Each case had been dismissed by authorities as voluntary disappearances. It wasn't just in Australia. As Rachel reached out to contacts in Moldova and Romania, a horrifying pattern emerged. Reports of missing migrant workers from Vietnam, the Philippines, even parts of Africa, all linked back to the same fake agencies. Locals whispered about trafficking rings operating out of abandoned factories in remote border towns, protected by layers of corruption that made them untouchable. In Wollongong, the weight of this revelation crushed the Navarro family. One evening, Mr. Navarro sat alone in the backyard, staring at the fading sky. His wife found him there, shoulders slumped, face wet with tears he couldn't hold back any longer. "I told him to go," he choked out. "I pushed him to take that job. I thought I was giving them a better life. God help me, I sent my sons to their deaths." His voice broke on the last word. Mrs. Navarro knelt beside him, wrapping her arms around him as they both wept, their grief tangled with unbearable guilt. But just as hope seemed entirely lost, Rachel's phone rang late one night. The caller's voice was thin, hoarse, and laced with fear. "I knew your sons," the man said. "Miguel, Diego, and Luis. We were kept in the same place." Rachel's heart pounded. She pressed for more details, her hand shaking as she scribbled notes. The man, an ex-captive who had managed to escape the ring, described a grim facility hidden in the Moldovan countryside, where workers were stripped of their passports, beaten, and forced into hard labor under threat of death. "Your sons were alive until they tried to run," he whispered. The line went dead before Rachel could ask more. But that chilling revelation cracked the case wide open. The Navarro brothers hadn't disappeared by choice. They had fought back and paid the price. This goes deeper than anyone wants to admit. "And I'm going to find out exactly how far it goes," says Rachel. The break in the Navarro case didn't come from police. It came from a man who had nothing left to lose. His name was Andrei Luca, a Romanian national who had once been trapped in the same nightmare as the three Navarro brothers. Now gaunt and hollow-eyed, Andrei stepped forward with a story so harrowing it left even hardened investigators shaken. He claimed he had been trafficked to a remote mining camp deep in Transnistria, the lawless, breakaway region on the border of Moldova and Ukraine. This wasn't some abandoned outpost. It was a secret, illegal mining operation hidden in the frozen wilderness. Workers were stripped of their passports and forced into brutal labor, digging for rare earth minerals sold on the black market. Andrei's voice trembled as he recounted the day he met the Navarro brothers. They came in smiling, still thinking they had jobs waiting. But by sunset, they knew the truth. They had been sold like cattle. The three brothers, Miguel, Diego, and Luis, were split up at first, beaten into submission. But it was Miguel, the eldest, who refused to break. Within weeks, he became an unspoken leader among the captives. He organized whispered meetings late at night, teaching the others to communicate in coded signals. Where others saw despair, Miguel saw a way out. He plotted an uprising, a dangerous plan that would require them to overpower the guards, steal supplies, and escape through the bitter, snow-choked forests of Transnistria. And they almost made it. The brothers, along with 9 other captives, executed their plan one frigid night under the cover of a blizzard. They smashed their shackles with stolen tools, overpowered a guard, and fled into the woods. For 3 days, they trudged through waist-deep snow, surviving on melted ice and scraps of food. The freezing wind cut through their thin clothes, but the hope of freedom kept them moving. But somewhere along the way, something went terribly wrong. According to Andrei, they were ambushed just as they reached the edge of the forest. Someone had betrayed them. "We found out later," Andrei whispered, his face pale, "that one of the Australians, a man who arrived with your sons, cut a deal with the bosses. He told them everything, where we would be, when we would leave." The traitor was a fellow recruit who had chosen self-preservation over solidarity. He bought his safety by dooming the others. The reenactment of that failed escape burned in the listener's mind. The crack of gunfire in the frozen dark, the cries of men falling into the snow, the chaos as dreams of freedom turned to terror. Miguel was seen rallying the group, even as bullets flew, trying to shield his younger brothers. Andrei's voice cracked as he recounted the last time he saw the Navarro brothers. Miguel was still fighting. Diego, I think he was hit. And Luis, he was running, calling for his brothers. Then came the twist that left the world guessing. Andrei swore that only one of the Navarro brothers survived the ambush. But when pressed, he refused to say which one. "One of them lived," he insisted. "I saw him being dragged back alive, but I never saw him again." The story ignited a firestorm of speculation. Was it Miguel, the fearless leader? Diego, the middle brother with a quiet strength? Or Luis, the youngest, desperate to save his family? Audiences around the world were left to wonder which brother survived, and what kind of life had he endured in the shadows all these years. The truth was out there, but it would take even more courage to uncover it. As Rachel Hooper dug deeper, the threads of the Navarro brothers' disappearance began to unravel something far darker, a rot that reached beyond Moldova's borders, stretching all the way back home to Australia. First came the leaked embassy records. Through an anonymous whistleblower within the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs, Rachel obtained proof that multiple distress calls and emails from missing migrant workers had been flagged and then buried. The embassy in Chisinau had quietly closed their investigations within days, marking the cases as unresponsive and voluntary disappearance. But that was only the beginning. Visa documents soon surfaced, forms meant to track the brothers' legal employment abroad. They were riddled with inconsistencies, forged signatures, fake employer stamps, and backdated entries. Experts confirmed they were falsified, designed to give the illusion that everything was legitimate. A clear sign that officials on both ends had been bribed to grease the wheels. Rachel's reports hit Australian news like a bombshell. Our government ignored their own citizens' pleas for help. Public outrage grew. How could a nation let 3 of its own sons vanish without lifting a finger? Back in Wollongong, the Navarros watched every broadcast, their heartbreak deepening with every revelation. Mr. Navarro, once stoic, slammed his fist on the table as tears streamed down his face. We weren't just fighting monsters in Moldova. We were fighting corruption here, in our own backyard. Mrs. Navarro whispered through her sobs. They let them die. For money. The emotional toll was unbearable, but then came the twist no one could explain. A financial leak from an international anti-corruption group revealed bank records that traced mysterious deposits made 6 years ago. Hefty sums wired into a private account in Lima, Peru. The name on the receiving account? Luis Navarro. Shock rippled through the investigation. Luis Navarro, the youngest son, had been presumed dead alongside his brothers. But this money trail, it painted a different picture. If all 3 sons had perished in the failed escape, as the survivor claimed, who was alive in Peru, and why had they been quietly receiving money? Was Luis really dead? Or had he survived, living in the shadows, bound by secrets too dark to face? The Navarros' hearts raced with new hope and fresh terror. Because if Luis had survived, the truth they were about to uncover might be even more painful than everything they'd learned so far. The world held its breath when Andre, the survivor, finally broke his silence completely. For 10 long years, the Navarro family had lived in a tormenting limbo. But now, the truth was emerging, raw and devastating. The survivor's voice shook as he made the confession that would change everything. It wasn't Miguel. It wasn't Diego. He murmured. It was Luis, the youngest. He survived. Luis, just 23 when he left Australia, had lived while his brothers perished in that frozen forest. But survival had come at an unbearable price. According to Andre, after the failed escape, Luis had been captured and brutally beaten. The traffickers saw something in him: desperation, youth, and most importantly, usefulness. They gave him a cruel choice: die like his brothers or work for them. In order to stay alive, Luis was forced into a role that twisted his soul. He became the bait, luring in new victims from desperate families across the world. They broke him, Andre said. They made him believe that helping them was the only way he'd survive. They used his fear, his grief, his shame. For years, Luis operated in the shadows, pretending to recruit workers in Eastern Europe while knowing he was sending them into the same hell that had claimed his brothers. Each name, each handshake weighed heavier on him, until the guilt threatened to swallow him whole. He didn't contact his family, not because he didn't love them, but because he believed they would never forgive what he had become. Luis thought he was beyond saving, Andre whispered. He believed his parents would spit on his name if they knew the truth. The revelation hit Mr. and Mrs. Navarro like a storm. Their baby boy was alive, but lost in a darkness deeper than death. And then came the twist no one saw coming. An international trafficking investigator, following leads sparked by Andre's testimony, had tracked Luis to Lima, Peru. For the last 3 years, Luis had been living under an alias, working at a remote shipping yard. He had escaped his captors but remained in hiding, consumed by shame, convinced that returning home would only bring more pain to his family. Dramatic irony hung over the story like a dagger. While the Navarros prayed for their son's return, Luis stayed away to protect them from his shame. Luis believed that the only way to atone was to disappear forever. But for Mr. and Mrs. Navarro, the discovery sparked something stronger than grief. A fierce, unconditional love. Their tears were no longer only of pain. They were of resolve. "I don't care what he did," Mrs. Navarro said through sobs. "He's our son, and we will find him. We will bring him back, no matter what it takes." Mr. Navarro's voice, usually so quiet, now thundered with a father's pain and determination. "He's not beyond saving. He's ours, and we're coming for him." And so, the story teetered on the edge of its final, most emotional chapter. A broken family, torn apart by betrayal and survival, now faced the hardest journey yet. Not across oceans, but across the chasm of guilt, shame, and forgiveness. Would they find Luis in time? And if they did, would he believe he was worthy of coming home? The journey to Lima was not just measured in miles. For the Navarro family, it was the weight of 10 years of grief, anger, and shattered hope pressing on their hearts. But nothing could prepare them for the moment they finally found him. In a forgotten slum district on the outskirts of Lima, down narrow alleyways and past crumbling buildings, they came face to face with the man their son had become. Luis Navarro, once the bright-eyed youngest brother, now stood before them, gaunt, hollow-eyed, and visibly shaking. He had been living under the false name Carlos Vega, eking out a living loading crates at the docks, forever hiding from the ghosts of his past. When his parents called out his real name, Luis, he froze. The world seemed to fall silent. And then he collapsed. Tears poured down his face as he fell to his knees, clutching at his chest as though the guilt might tear him apart. "I wanted to come home, but I didn't deserve to." His voice cracked. "I let them die. I became one of them. I lured people. I'm no son. I'm a monster." But his mother didn't hesitate. She dropped beside him, wrapping her arms around him, sobbing as she whispered, "No, Mijo, you're my son. You were their victim too. You come home with us." Mr. Navarro, the father who had once been too broken to even speak of his boys, pulled them both into his embrace. For the first time in a decade, the family was whole, not unscarred but together. The emotional reunion sparked the turning point the world had been waiting for. With Luis finally ready to confront the truth, he gave a full confession to Interpol agents, detailing the trafficking syndicate's operations, names, routes, safe houses, corrupt officials. He exposed the entire machinery that had swallowed up not just him and his brothers, but hundreds of other desperate workers across Eastern Europe and beyond. And then the justice unfolded. Coordinated raids were launched across Moldova, Transnistria, and other known hubs. Hidden compounds were stormed, captives freed. Dozens of key traffickers, men who had operated with impunity for years, were arrested and dragged into the harsh light of international law. But the reckoning didn't stop there. Investigative reports soon revealed that some Australian and Moldovan officials had quietly enabled the trafficking network, turning a blind eye in exchange for bribes or political favors. The public was outraged. Protests erupted. Officials once protected by power were forced to resign in disgrace. Some faced criminal charges. The Navarro family's decade of pain had not been in vain. Their son's tragic fate ignited a chain reaction that dismantled one of the most insidious trafficking networks in the world. Their story became not just one of loss, but of hard-won justice. As for Luis, his journey was far from over. He returned to Wollongong, not as a fallen man, but as someone struggling to rebuild. The scars remained, both inside and out, but his parents' embrace never wavered. Together, they founded a charity to help other survivors of trafficking, turning their darkest pain into a beacon of hope for others. And so, the story closed not with vengeance, but with redemption. Justice was served, the guilty exposed, and a broken family, though forever changed, found a way back to each other. Because sometimes the most powerful justice is the chance to come home.